right, good morning. I'm Jushin Stephen Butcher, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning. Reverend Shodo Spring is a Dharma heir of Shohaku Okumura, and she first met the Dharma through Katagiri Roshi. Shodo's practice focuses on our relationship with all sentient beings through an organization called Mountains and Waters Alliance. In 1988, she spent a year at Hokyoji with just the trees and hills as sangha. And in 2013, she walked across the Great Plains with a small group. And she's working on her second book. So, good morning, Reverend Shodo.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Hello Jan from the old days. I thought for a while about what to talk about, and finally decided that I'm going to acknowledge some things rather than talking about them. There's a situation in the world that makes us exceptionally aware of life and death. That begins with the war in Ukraine. People are horrified. A lot of opinions are happening. And we have images coming to us of just how awful that is. We are in the process of the collapse of our society, which I would say you can see partly by the polarization over the pandemic and over the elections, a general dysfunctionality and increase in mental illness. And we're in an ecosystem collapse, possibly. Floods, wildfires, drought, hunger. So in this world, I speak to you about the Genjo Koan. Those words are sometimes translated the matter at hand, sometimes translated actualizing the fundamental point. I studied this and came up with a sentence. All things are immediately manifest, distinctly individual, ultimately equal in their place in the universe. And that's my comment on those things I said before, or maybe it's Dogen's comment. He also lived in a difficult time. I'm going to particularly focus on those 4 lines which begin to study the Buddha way is to study the self. I'll start by reading Okumura's translation. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be verified by all things. To be verified by all things is to let the body and mind of the self and the body and mind of others drop off. There is a trace of realization that cannot be grasped. We endlessly express this ungraspable trace of realization. Some years ago, when I had more time, I did some study of the words, the Japanese words, trying to understand this passage more closely. So, Buddha, Butsu. The character for Buddha includes the character for a person, plus a picture of a bow and arrow signifying death. So Buddha is a person facing death. Do means way, road, path, morality, duty. Study, narau, or learn or model yourself after in various translations. It has an image of a baby bird. and a picture of the sun, and a character that means will or invitation. So the image of studying is like the image of a baby bird learning to fly from its mother. It's also translated get accustomed to, become familiar with, get used to, become intimate with. And when I think of the image of baby birds learning to fly, I remember the time that I watched a baby seal learning to swim. It was totally a gift. I had stopped at a rest stop, and there was something interesting going on in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean. And this little seal and the big seal, and the little seal was on top of the big seal, and then the big one would go down and leave the little one kind of floundering in the water. And then she would come up, I'm assuming this was the mother, and support the little seal again. And then she would go down again and again and again. And finally, we went, I think these are swimming lessons. But it was amazing to be present, to watch that. And it was amazing to think about that process. Just keep trying again and again, knowing that you're safe. That's what we're doing when we study. It's a very intimate process. Jiko, meaning self, has two parts, and both of them mean self. The first one is a picture of an eye with a pointer. And the meaning of the eye includes look, attention, experience. To me, that suggests that self is that which notices. It's a point of awareness. So this self is just a point of awareness and is that self and that self. And then we have study again. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To become intimate with the way of Buddha is to become intimate with yourself. To become comfortable with yourself. This is a natural process. It's as ordinary as a baby bird learning to fly. It's as ordinary as a human, becoming able to function in the Dharma. And the Dharma doesn't just mean the teaching, although it does mean the teaching. Dharma also means the way the universe works. So several definitions of self. The self is the function of mind which is oriented to gratify itself, to protect itself. We notice it in introspection, which is made up by memories of past concrete experiences. The self is the mind's self-image. The self has anxiety about impermanence and death, which causes both desire and hatred. The authentic self, with the ceasing of fear and hate, is the restoration of unity of mind. It's not separate from things. It is the life and death process. So we have this side of self and that side of self. The self is a succession of momentary experiential states. Beyond anthropocentrism, this is Buddha nature. The self is the lived experience of essential relationality. It's just totally living in the world. There is nothing but relation. and then a string of translations. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To model yourself after the way of the Buddha is to model yourself after yourself. To learn and practice the Buddha way is to learn and practice the self. To become intimate with the Buddha way is to become intimate with your own self, to become comfortable with yourself. So, first line. Now, to study the self is to forget the self. To become intimate with yourself is to forget the self, or to go beyond the self. To learn and practice the so-called self is to completely forget the self. So Jiko is still self with that image of the point of awareness. Forget also means dropping, going beyond, letting go of. Myriad. Oh, I'm in the next line already. Ha. Next line, to forget the self is to be verified by the Myriad Dharmas. I think I'm missing a page. Okay. So the Myriad Dharmas, also known as the 10,000 things. Dharmas include both teaching, phenomena, and law. The word that Okumura Roshi translates as verify is show, which also means prove, enlighten, verify, witness, or certify. So witness and certify are interesting. There's a picture of someone getting up on a witness stand and speaking. That's the verify we're talking about. And it is one of the words that's translated as enlightenment. And the rest of it is a passive verb. So we have to be verified. To forget the self is to be verified by the Myriad Dharmas. To be certified by a multitude of processes, witnessed by 10,000 laws. And I add, all the dharmas, all the teachings, all the things rise up and call your name. They affirm you, they speak you into being. They see you, they guarantee you, they testify you. And I have a quotation from Reb Anderson, who I studied with when I was doing this work, who said, forgetting the self is the condition of authenticity. As long as you're wandering around with the self, there's something that's not right. So then the next line, to be verified by myriad dharmas causing the fading, falling away, escaping from the body, mind, and heart of self and others. So we have myriad again, and then ho, dharmas, processes, laws, principles, regulations, codes, method, way, manner, system, process, technique, religion, doctrine, and reason. verified by all of those. And then by body, shin, and jin, heart, mind, which in Japanese is kokoro, and heart, mind are the same. So this is the mind. And you could put the heart up here, but a Japanese person will point here when they're talking about their mind. So early translators chose the word mind for this. And more in the past, quite a number of years now, people have started saying heart. Datsu, shed, remove, escape from. Raku, fall, drop, omit, fade. So here's the Shinjin Datsu Raku, the dropping off of body and mind. Francis Cook, one of our respected translators, says that to drop off body and mind is to drop off fear of death and attachment to ideas, opinions, religions, and metaphysical schemes, and to move to true thinking. Dropping attachments, drop off fears, drop off the three poisons, and let true thinking happen. It's not that I can do true thinking, it's that true thinking can happen in me. And finally, no trace, oops, let me stick with the same one. There is a trace of realization that cannot be grasped. We endlessly express this ungraspable trace of realization. Go. Another of the words for enlightenment means to perceive, to realize, to understand. And something talks to a person in their heart, in your heart, about yourself. Seki, trace. Q, rest, suspend, take a vacation, be relieved. Katsu, stop. The traces of realization, the marks of realization, take a vacation. They're relieved, they stop. And Q, suspend. Stop is trace of realization. Long, lengthy, superior, excellent. Finally, a picture of a sprout appearing from the earth. And the words are born of, appearing from, emerging, going out, sending out, be raised, be produced. And the last word is a causative. So the stopping of signs of realization causes a long, long emergence, a sending out, an appearance, a birth. So there are signs of realization, and we want them, or we like them. People who experience them like them, get excited about them. And here is Dogen saying, yeah, but when those signs are gone, that's when you begin. That's when you're born. No trace continues endlessly. Endlessly, without stopping, continues without end. Nishijima. Then we can forget the mental trace of realization and show the real signs of forgotten realization continually, moment by moment. Cook. One must eternally emerge from this resting. This is a hard sentence. You can tell people come up with so many different ways to speak of it. Clearly, there is ceasing the traces of enlightenment, which causes one to forever leave the traces of enlightenment, which is cessation. Nishiyama and Stevens, when you have reached this stage, you will be detached, even from enlightenment, but will practice it continually without thinking about it. Masunaga, it means wiping out even attachment to Satori. Wiping out attachment to Satori, we must enter actual society. And Kasulas is the one who said to model yourself after the way of the Buddha. He says, the distinguishing marks of enlightenment dissolve, and the molding of body and mind causes those dissolving marks of enlightenment to emerge continuously. So I have to read all these people because I don't understand this myself. I have clues, I have hints. In my first few years at Minnesota Zen Center, there was on the table, I think, a little paper with these 4 lines printed, and it said, to forget the self is to be lived by all beings. And I was so fascinated. I was just totally fascinated. And eventually, but so I would look, and then when I had access, I started studying kanji. And I finally was at a workshop with Kaz Tanahashi, and I asked him, and he said, well, it's not a translation. But I should have asked him more, but I didn't. So I kept looking through books, and I came up with these things. Verified, seen, witnessed. And it seems to me that being witnessed is incredibly important. If we're not seen, heard, touched, felt in some way, what's there? So this self, the self which on the one hand is kind of a problem, it tries to protect itself, it thinks it exists, or it thinks it's permanent and independent, actually. And then we have the self, which is the entire process of the entire universe. Just here's this little place that looks out from this body and from everybody. So we have all these little points of perception. All things are immediately manifest, distinctly individual, ultimately equal, and in their place in the universe. I don't have more to say. Would anybody like to offer a question or a comment? Yes.
So at the beginning, you were talking about Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
How would you relate this passage to what's going on there? How would you like to connect these things?
Oh, right. So when I respond to Ukraine, I have to mention Sudan, West Sahara, quite a lot of other places in the world where we have as vigorously notice the stuff that's going on. That's not an answer to the question. It's just a sort of a disclaimer. It's like, it's happening to people who look like us, and it's happening very violently. And so we notice. I don't know if I'm going to have an answer. I'll just say some words. One of the things that I notice is that I can relate. I feel connected to the people who are receiving that violence and to the people who are standing up against it. And I struggle to relate to the people who are committing it. Not so much the foot soldiers. Myself, my small self gets very involved with Ukraine. It's like somebody tells me a story of Ukrainian soldiers committing atrocities, and I don't want to hear about it. You know, I immediately, and we all immediately go into good guys and bad guys. So when I chant, I do chant for Ukraine in morning service, and I chant for the people of Ukraine, and I chant for the people in the Russian army. And then I have a chant for people that I have difficulty with. And so sometimes I chant for Vladimir Putin. And sometimes I think maybe I shouldn't break people up into so many categories. But people who are in war or in prison, or sick or homeless or hungry. And likewise, plants and animals who are in those situations. I reach to them, and I notice it's like, although I can relate to the people, I don't relate to the experience. This hasn't happened to me. Okay, so let me see. One of the responses that's happened is a lot of people in a lot of places are practicing meditation. I think there's one on Sunday mornings. There's someone in Kyiv who's going online and hosting meditation. And that seems like a response to me. I also know I'm not answering your question. Would you ask it again? Let's see if it'll bring something forth.
First, what you've said so far is fine. But to repeat the question in case it brings up anything else. At the beginning, you had talked about Ukraine, and just wondering how the 4-line passage you've been talking about, what sort of connection or what sort of things it brings up with Ukraine.
Okay, that helped. So there's something about intimacy. And that intimacy, when we let go of an attachment to this person, the whole world is available to us. And so there's intimacy. And for me, it's like, so Ukraine is easier to access, just like my own family would be easier to access. And so they become a door to access my response to the cries of the world, to the cries of all the world, including minds that are, corrupted or damaged and unable to love. The temptation to compare, which is worse, to have that mind or to be hurt by somebody with that mind. I'm not going to go there. I think that's a mistake. I'll just say it's a mistake to compare. But wishing to be intimate with all of them and to go beyond my opinions and my judgment and allow myself to be created. And I said, I like that word, lived and witnessed. It's like, okay, there's something really painful and disastrous happening over there. And that creates me just as much as last night's moon creates me. And I have to let these things see me and witness me. And I look back at them. And that looking back, that we look at each other. I don't know what to say. It's like that's the act, is to just let them in and look back. And some kind of physical actions arise out of that. But it would not be mine to prescribe what somebody else's actions would be. Thank you for an incredible question. Erin.
Yeah, I had this question in mind, and actually your answer to Tim, I think is sort of helped me with that a little bit, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyway. The word in those lines that always, I don't know, seemed really confusing to me. They're all confusing, but it's the forget part. And I always kind of wondered why that was chosen in a translation, but also why it was used in the original. And you had mentioned, I think it was Reb Anderson had a commentary on that. And that was kind of, I don't know, I was just wondering if you might speak a little bit, just this idea of where we have the self, and then why would we forget it as opposed to doing something else with it, or I don't know, that's word salad, but just that word.
Yeah, that's good. So a funny thing happened to me when I was checking on these words and the kanji and everything. And the word that I had written down, which is translated as forget, I could not find that word either in the online dictionary or in my own dictionary. Now, not finding that's like suru is apparently not kanji, but it means that I can't. It's like I looked at my page, the place where I said I must be missing a page. That's because I remembered doing something with forget and I couldn't find it. And let me see, every single person used the word forget. Every single translator. The 8 or 10 of them here. So let's see, what Reb said was, forgetting the self is the condition of authenticity. So there's a way that we go through our lives and we're kind of managing things. You know, one of the parts of the mind is a manager. And there's something that needs to happen to that manager. And so they stop. I mean, managing is too much like manipulating. Reb also once said, you don't make decisions. And we had some discussions about that. He says, well, if you don't decide, somebody had to get plane tickets to go home. I said, well, if he doesn't decide to do that, what does it, that makes no sense. And he said, well, you know, you're just going on about the day and all of a sudden you find yourself on the phone getting the tickets. So I puzzled over that for a while I was living there. But I think there's a thing that happens, this thing of being verified by all beings. Um, ah, there we go. Verified by the Myriad Dharmas, certified witnessed. And what I said was, they rise up and call your name, they affirm you, they speak you into being. I have had the experience of doing something that I was certain had been given me to do. And life works better that way. um, it was a wonderful, this condition of authenticity. It was like, authentic life is like that. It's not about planning and scheming. It's about just following what arises, following what's given to you by life. But I don't have anything to say about the word forget itself, because I ran into trouble about it. Except that somebody also said to go beyond the self. And I don't know whether that was my idea or whether I read it somewhere. Because I'm doing this, I took some old notes and reworked them. But going beyond the self makes sense to me. If you ask another question, I can offer some more. Like if that didn't work.
No, I think it's, I think I might have either looked it up or maybe I asked somebody, and I remember, I think I remember, it was just kind of a straightforward, is what wasureru, I think was, I mean, it was just sort of a, yeah, it means forget. I mean, it didn't seem to have a bunch of layers to it. And I just, yeah. I guess if you sort of know something is there and recall it, but it no longer has the power it once held, or something like that, that doesn't forgetting to me, because it's kind of still there. And I wonder at what point it becomes, what does forget actually mean? I don't know. I just didn't.
Yeah, I got stuck there because I couldn't look up the original word, and I didn't have the kanji, which usually I have something that has the kanji and I can look that up, but I didn't. So, but what you're saying makes sense to what it's like. It's like, yeah, just way in the background. It's not important anymore. You could retrieve if you went looking for it. So to forget the self. Oh, actually, there's a thing that happens, and it comes up as a challenge in Zen practice sometime, which is, well, if you're forgetting the self and if you're letting go of all the conditional things, well, how do you get through a day? Well, you pick up the self again and you do stuff. That's how you get through the day. You remember how to drive a car. You remember how to make breakfast. You remember how to walk. All those things, but they're kind of forgotten. They're in the background. Yes. That's Justin, named Hokyoji. You're muted.
I undid the wrong one. Yeah, it's Jushin. Spell correct actually turns it into Justin all the time. I get the oddest emails.
Oh, much. Thank you.
No worries. It's small print down there. And also I switched accounts. So on the last one, I wonder, and I've often had this, especially some of the some of the accounts by Linji, though, and more in the Rinzai tradition, I don't think I see it as much in the Shodo, is this idea in modern terms of what we're talking about is flow states. If you enter a flow state and you're just there with what you're doing, the self drops away. You are just doing it. And then it sort of works into Genjo Koan, which is like, oh, here's the big flow state. And you can seamlessly move into driving a car, and you're just driving a car, and you see you don't need a self with a big S to drive a car. I've always been leery of identifying it completely with the psychological flow states because they also lose track of time in flow states. And Dogen, like when Dogen talks about being time, that might actually be what he's talking about. I don't know. But I always thought it would just be weird. Like the goal is just to be born, and then you're just authentically in, and you die, and it's over, and that's fine. I thought, well, that's a little weird. But I guess it's related to what you were saying. My actual question is, when Dogen is talking about these things, I just feel that so much of his Tendai esoteric roots are coming through. And he's focusing it away from an otherworldly esotericism, whatever that is, to the world that presents itself, your actual experience, rather than, we were talking before, but way before Zazen, I had practiced in the Tibetan tradition. And you visualize the mandala, and you have the deity as the aspect of the Buddha, and you generate all the thing. And then basically it's like, no. This right in front of you is that. Don't add anything, don't take anything away. But it's sort of a weird mundane esoteric approach.
So that's why I'm with Dogen. It's like,
Oh.
I read some of the other people, I always think they're really exciting, and then I get bored with them. But this right here is where the magic is.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes this right here is really miserable, but it's still where the magic is. I don't know anything about flow states. Heard about.
Yeah, it was a book. I can't pronounce his name, but it's I think it's Czech. But he wrote a whole book on flow state. Oh yeah, there. Kikan has put it in chat. It's Mihail Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah, like it's Czech. I cannot even begin to pronounce it. Yes.
Yeah, right. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Beyond Boredom and Anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always been.
Remember when everybody was talking about flow? Yeah. It just somehow never became my focus. So it's like, okay, that sounds nice. Yeah, keep going.
Just about that, listening to that talk, it was really interesting because he did like these basically 3 talks on Genjo Koan. This is Katagiri Roshi. And at the end, a student asked a question basically about some point saying, look, basically, I still don't get it. Could you explain a little bit more? And Katagiri Roshi, paraphrasing, said something to the effect of, look, just go read this book.
Oh.
For starters. And this is the book that was the predecessor to the book Flow by the guy which I also can't pronounce. So, and it just blew me away when I ran into that. It's like, wow, this is an interesting contemporary thing.
No, wait, what was that?
What's that?
When was that talk?
This was this was Shobo Genjo Koan Talk 2. This was June 7th, 1987.
87, I was at Hokyoji. I missed it.
Ah. Anyway, thank you for your talk. I don't have a comment other than that.
Okay, thank you. Chan.
So I must have been there for 1987, but I don't remember. So this is going to be kind of messed up and rambling, but I'm going to try to put this together. So the whole thing with Ukraine gets to the point of we'd really like the world to be different than it is. We'd really like to have some control. So we do these, rely on the government to do sanctions, and the government says, well, the sanctions aren't to control behavior. The sanctions are to limit behavior. Okay. But basically, the whole thing penetrates because we don't have control and we want something to be different than it is. So Kikon, for his youth practice, did this thing to make the Four Noble Truths easier to understand. And the first one was basically, you're not getting things the way you want them to be. And when we went to prison work together, and we posited that to the inmates, and they could relate, right? Right? Because things didn't work out the way they hoped they would be. So this aspect of control, is what this little self is all about. We want to think that we can control things. We want to think we can get things the way we want them to be. And at some point, there's just this helplessness that comes in. And so something like Ukraine, this helplessness comes in. Other situations in our life, this helplessness comes in, and it's just, if you're lucky, you can just drop that idea of control. And then you realize that all these causes and conditions are moving through you. And yeah, I do know how to drive a car. And there have been times when I was really, like my mother was in a coma, and we had to fly back to Pittsburgh, and I was like ready to be a puddle on the floor if anything happened to interfere with that. And I just, the people in the airport and everything, everybody was so kind because they were just doing their jobs, facilitating my getting from Minneapolis to Pittsburgh. And it was like, it was no big deal, but I realized at that point, I was just out of control. I had no control, but there were all these aspects of the world coming through me, helping me to maintain and move through. So it's like forgetting the self and being verified by all the causes and conditions of the universe. So Ted O'Toole has talked about this after a profound experience, and he went to Tim and said, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can manage anymore because of the profoundness of this experience. And Tim said, you've trained all your life to be Ted. I think you're going to be able to be Ted. So this is, I think, to me, this is one way of relating to this passage, that you just kind of, you realize this idea of control is not in your control. There's a helplessness that you're just riding along in some ways. So that's my small contribution.
That's a very great contribution. I appreciate it. Tim.
So it's just in my head, just there's an interesting little exercise, that I don't remember all the lines from that 4-line passage, but while Jan was talking, I was substituting the word control for the word self. So to study the self is to forget control to forget controls, to be witnessed by all the myriad things. It seemed to have some merit in making that substitution.
Yeah, it's pretty good because there's a self. It's independent. It creates itself. It will live forever, even after we die, and all this stuff. And it's like you forget that one, and like the world starts to happen. So yeah, like the control thing is like, and we of course live in a society where control is everything. And so just to not buy into that is like revolutionary. That's not a very Buddhist word, but that's what comes to mind. Actually, I said this to Okumura Roshi once, and I forget what was going on that I wasn't in because we had a sesshin. But I said, actually, just not to participate in that stuff is radical. And he said, yeah, just not participating. I do have a story here if anybody would like to hear it. But only if, okay. So it's a page long. That's part of why I thought I had more time. But I will shorten it. So in the mid-60s, there was a man who worked for the Rand Corporation, and then he read Jack Kerouac's books. And there was a particular scene in the book that had to do with a rock garden in Kyoto. So later on, this person went to Japan and he thought, I want to go visit that garden. So he went to the garden in Kyoto and saw it. And then he went to a bar and he couldn't read the menu, but there were a couple of Americans there who came over and helped him. And it says here, they joined him at his table and began talking. When they introduced each other, Dan discovered that one of the Americans was Gary Snyder. He looked closely at Snyder and said, "You're the reason I came to Kyoto." They talked all night about the war and so forth. He didn't really agree with them. It was Daniel Ellsberg. An all-night conversation with a couple of Dharma bums made him into a person who could not keep doing secret war data at the Pentagon. And I think he spent a long time, photocopying those the documents and sneaking them out of the building, because this was before, now you just take a thumb drive. But I think it involved thousands of physical pages. And he thought he would spend the rest of his life in prison. But something in the universe came together and he didn't. And what it said to me is, you never know the results of your actions. I mean, Dan Ellsberg certainly didn't know there was going to be a consequence to his visiting that rock garden. And Gary Snyder is kind of the archetypal, just flow version of Zen. And he wouldn't have known that having that conversation would actually result in something that actually changed the course of history. You never know what action of yours is going to have an impact. Anything else?
All right.
Thank you for a lovely conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's see. We are, next week, we will have, I know this, Reverend Kyoku Tracy Whalen will be giving the Dharma talk. And as is par for the course, I don't have a title yet, but I'm sure it will be good. And Hokyoji, there are many things going on. It's spring. We have next weekend is the work weekend. And then I guess that would be the following weekend, if my math is right, is Caring for the Land. There's also a women's retreat in May. I think it's May 8th, which is Mother's Day, but it's ending early so that everybody can get back to their families. I don't know. For myself, nothing says there's not a better way of saying Mother's Day than letting mom go to her retreat. So let mom go to her retreat, peeps. And let's see, and there will be other programs you can check on the Hokyoji's website. Also, we are supported by Donna, so if you feel so moved, you can also go to the website and donate there. And we're going to close with the 4 vows. So, beings are numberless. I vow freedom. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.